The question slipped out of her mouth like it had nowhere else left to go, trembling in the air between them, fragile and unexpected. And for a moment the entire garage seemed to hold its breath, as if even the clanking metal and humming engines knew something irreversible had just begun. What if someone asked you something like that out of nowhere when your life was already hanging by a thread? Would you laugh it off, or would you take the risk, not knowing it might change everything? Jason wiped his hands on a rag, grease still clinging stubbornly to the lines of his skin, and stared at her as if he hadn't heard correctly. She stood there in a soft yellow dress that didn't belong in a place like this, surrounded by oil stains and broken engines, her posture calm but her eyes carrying something heavier than confidence. It wasn't the kind of look people wore when they were joking. He had spent the last 3 years rebuilding his life piece by piece, ever since his younger brother passed away and left behind a mountain of debt, and a silence that never quite went away. The garage was all Jason had now, barely surviving month to month, held together by long hours, aching hands, and a stubborn refusal to give up. He didn't have time for distractions, let alone strange invitations from women who seemed to come from an entirely different world. Yet something about her felt real, almost desperate, like she was reaching for something she couldn't name. Her name was Victoria. She had come in earlier that morning with a minor issue on her car, something simple he fixed within minutes. But instead of leaving, she lingered, watching him work, asking small questions that felt oddly sincere. He noticed how she listened, really listened, as if his answers mattered. When she asked if he would be her date for the weekend, there was no hint of arrogance or playfulness, just vulnerability. Jason hesitated, the weight of his own life pressing down on him. He thought about the overdue rent notice sitting on his kitchen counter, the unpaid bills, the exhaustion that followed him everywhere. This wasn't his world. People like her didn't cross paths with people like him unless something was wrong. Still, he heard himself saying yes. Maybe it was curiosity. Maybe it was loneliness. Or maybe, deep down, he needed to believe that something unexpected could still happen in a life that had become painfully predictable. The weekend began quietly. Victoria picked him up in a modest car, nothing flashy, nothing that hinted at anything unusual. They drove along the California coast, the ocean stretching endlessly beside them, its waves crashing like a heartbeat he hadn't felt in years. She spoke about simple things, favorite childhood memories, places she dreamed of visiting, books that made her cry. There was a softness to her words that made Jason forget, just for a moment, how heavy his own thoughts usually were. He found himself opening up in ways he hadn't planned. He told her about his brother, about the night everything changed, about the guilt that lingered like a shadow he couldn't outrun. He didn't expect her to understand, but she listened without interrupting, her eyes glistening in a way that made him feel seen. For the first time in years, Jason didn't feel like he was carrying everything alone. But there were moments that didn't quite add up, subtle details that slipped through the cracks. The way strangers occasionally looked at her with recognition. The way she would check her phone and her expression would shift just for a second before returning to that calm composure. The way she avoided certain questions, not with dishonesty but with careful redirection. It lingered in the back of his mind, but he chose not to press. Some things felt better left untouched. On the second night, they attended a small event at a hotel overlooking the city. Jason almost didn't go. He stood in front of his mirror for what felt like hours, staring at the only suit he owned, one that had seen better days. He felt out of place before he even stepped out the door. But when Victoria saw him, her smile held something warm and genuine, something that made the discomfort fade, even if only slightly. The moment they entered the venue, everything changed. People turned. Conversations shifted. There was a ripple in the room that Jason couldn't ignore. Men in tailored suits approached Victoria with a level of respect that felt out of proportion. Women greeted her with admiration, their voices carrying a tone he had only ever seen directed at powerful figures. And then he heard it. Someone whispered her name, followed by a title that hit him like a sudden drop beneath his feet. CEO, millionaire. The words didn't belong in his world, and yet they stood there undeniable. Jason felt the air leave his lungs. He looked at her, really looked at her, and suddenly every small detail made sense. The way she carried herself, the way others reacted to her, the quiet confidence she wore like second skin. She wasn't just someone passing through his life. She was someone who lived in a completely different reality. The rest of the evening blurred into something distant and surreal. Jason smiled when he had to, nodded when expected, but inside, something had shifted. He felt small, like a misplaced piece in a puzzle that was never meant for him. When they finally stepped outside, the cool night air hit him like a wake-up call. He didn't yell, he didn't accuse, but the hurt in his voice was impossible to hide. It wasn't about the money, it was about the silence. The feeling that he had been walking through something real, only to realize there were parts of it he was never meant to see. Victoria's eyes filled with something fragile, something close to regret. She explained that she hadn't told him because she wanted, just once, to be seen without the weight of who she was. Her life was filled with people who treated her differently the moment they learned her status. She wanted something honest, something untouched by expectations or assumptions. And somehow, she had found that in a mechanic who didn't know her name. Jason listened, the anger inside him slowly unraveling into something more complicated. He understood more than he wanted to admit. He knew what it felt like to carry something heavy, something that shaped how the world saw you. But understanding didn't erase the distance between them. The weekend ended quietly. No dramatic goodbye, no promises, just two people standing at the edge of something that could have been unsure if it was enough. Weeks passed. Jason returned to his routine, the familiar rhythm of his life settling back in. But something had changed. The silence felt different now, less suffocating, as if a small part of him had remembered what it felt like to hope. One afternoon, as he worked beneath the hood of a car, he noticed a familiar vehicle pull into the garage. His heart paused. Victoria stepped out, not in a designer dress, not surrounded by attention, but just as she had been the first day, simple, real. She walked toward him with a quiet determination, as if she had made a choice she couldn't turn back from. This time there were no secrets, just honesty, and maybe, just maybe, a second chance. Before the story fades from your heart, tell me in the comments, if you were Jason, would you have walked away or stayed and taken the risk? And if this story touched something deep inside you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Only if it truly meant something to you.